For centuries, knowledge has been hidden in plain sight across the sands of time. Whispers of lost civilizations, cryptic symbols, and forbidden histories have been erased or concealed. What if the truth was never lost, but hidden? Welcome to Eye of Ancient Mysteries, where the past speaks and the future listens. Sit back, open your mind, and prepare to uncover the untold secrets of our world. Let the journey begin now. At that time, Nuremberg was far from being as popular as it is today. Irving was not performing Faust there, and the very name of the old town was likely unknown to most tourists. My wife and I were in the second week of our honeymoon, and naturally, we were already feeling the need for new company. So when the cheerful wanderer Elias P. Hutchison, hailing from Eastmean, Bleeding Gulch, Maple Tree County, Nebraska, appeared at the Frankfurt station and casually mentioned that he was headed to see this city, older than Methuselah, and that traveling such a long way alone was enough to plunge even the smartest and most active citizen into the deep melancholy characteristic of those asylums for the insane. We picked up on the obvious hint and invited him to join us. Later, comparing notes, my wife and I discovered that each of us had intended to respond with some shyness and hesitation, so as not to seem too eager, since that might not be particularly flattering to our marriage. But our attempt was entirely ruined because we both spoke at the same time, stopped, and then continued again in unison. In any case, the important thing is that we invited him, and Elias P. Hutchison joined our company. Amelia and I immediately noticed his positive influence. Rather than arguing as we had before, we found that the presence of a third person encouraged us to seize every opportunity to cuddle and indulge in some affection in a quiet corner. Amelia even claims that since then, as a result of this experience, she advises all her friends to bring a close acquaintance along on their honeymoon. Thus, we explored Nuremberg together, enjoying the colorful remarks of our overseas companion, who, with his peculiar language and incredible stock of adventures, seemed as if he had stepped straight out of a novel. We saved the castle as the last of the landmarks we intended to see, and on the day planned for the visit, we strolled along the city's outer wall at its eastern end. The castle rises on a rock high above the city, and on its northern side, it is protected by a massive moat. Nuremberg had the good fortune never to have been plundered. Otherwise, it would hardly have remained as neat and perfect as it is today. The moat had not been used for centuries, and was now covered with cafes and orchards, where large, lushly green trees grew. As we lazily and aimlessly wandered under the hot July sun around the wall, we frequently stopped to admire the views before us, especially the vast plain covered with towns and villages, ending in a blue chain of hills, like a painting by Claude Lorraine. Our gaze inevitably returned to the city and its endless array of picturesque steep roofs, dotted with dormer windows. To our right rose the towers of the castle itself, and even closer to us stood the grim and foreboding Tower of Torture. At that time, and I believe still today, the most fascinating sight in the city. For centuries, Nuremberg's Iron Maiden had been cited as an example of the horrors and cruelty of which man is capable. We had long wished to see it, and now we had finally arrived at its home. During one of our pauses, we leaned against the wall above the moat and looked down. The garden lay some 50 or 60 feet below us, bathed in still, oven-like heat. Above it rose the gray, somber wall, seemingly endlessly high and merging into fortifications extending left and right. At its upper part, treetops and bushes peeked out, and beyond them the tall houses, whose solid beauty bore the stamp of time's approval. The sun blazed down, filling us with languor, and as we had no reason to hurry, we continued idling by the wall. Directly below us, a large black cat stretched lazily in the sun, while near it, a small black kitten playfully jumped about. The mother playfully flicked her tail or nudged the kitten with her paws, as if encouraging it to keep playing. They were at the very bottom of the wall, and Elias P. Hutchison, eager to prolong the entertainment, bent down and picked up a medium-sized stone from the path. "Look," he said, "I'll drop this down, and they'll wonder where it came from." "Be careful," my wife cried. "You might hit the poor little kitten." Elias P. replied. "Why, I'm gentler than Maine cherry wood. God bless you, dear lady, but that would be like scalping a baby." "I swear on my striped socks that I won't." "Look, I'll toss it far enough so it won't come near it at all." With that, he leaned forward, stretched his arm fully, and let the stone fall. Perhaps there was some unknown force drawing the small toward the large, or more likely, the wall sloped outward at its base in a way we couldn't see from above. Whatever the reason, the stone landed directly on the kitten's head, with a chillingly loud thud that carried through the hot air and crushed its skull. The black cat looked up at us, its eyes flashing green fire, then immediately turned its attention to the kitten, which now lay lifeless, its tiny limbs twitching occasionally. A thin red trickle seeped from its gaping wound. With a muffled cry, almost human-like in its anguish, the cat bent over its offspring and began to lick the wound, whimpering all the while. Then, suddenly realizing the kitten was dead, she looked up at us once more. I will never forget the sight. It was the very embodiment of hatred. Her green eyes blazed with terrifying fury. Her sharp white teeth gleamed amid her blood-streaked muzzle and whiskers. With a savage snarl, she bared her claws, then flung herself madly at the wall as if trying to reach us. But when she lost momentum, she fell back, making the scene even more horrifying as she landed atop the kitten's broken body. When she rose again, her black fur was smeared with blood and brain matter. Amelia turned pale, and I led her away from the wall. Nearby, in the shade of a sycamore tree, there was a bench where I seated her to recover. Then I returned to Hutchison, who stood motionless, staring down at the enraged cat. When he saw me, he said, "Fierce, ain't she? That's about the wildest critter I ever did see, 'cept maybe an Apache squaw who had it in for a half-breed. They called him Split Log. She hated him for what he did to her kid, that he stole in a raid. Wanted to show how much he appreciated their fire torture, since they'd done the same to his mother. She had just that same kind of look, all the time, till she finally got her hands on him. Took her 3 years of tracking him down, and they say there wasn't a man, red or white, who ever died slower or suffered more. The only time I saw her smile was when I shot her dead. As he spoke, the cat continued her furious attempts to scale the wall, running back and leaping upward, sometimes managing to climb an astonishing height. She paid no heed to her brutal falls, each one only seeming to fuel her monstrous rage. Hutchison was a compassionate man. My wife and I had noticed several times the attention he showed both animals and people, and he was visibly troubled by the cat's violent desperation. Good God, he said, but really, this poor creature has fallen into utter despair. Come now, my dear. It was just an unfortunate accident. I know this won't bring back your kitten. I know that, but believe me, if I had known, I would never have done it. Look at me. I'm such a clumsy fool. I can't even play properly with a little kitten. What a left-handed idiot I am. I can't even have some fun with a cat. Tell me, Conal, he had the pleasant habit of handing out titles left and right. I hope your wife isn't angry with me over this little mishap. But really, if I had known, I wouldn't have done it for anything in the world. He approached Amelia and began apologizing endlessly, and she, with her usual kindness, quickly reassured him that she understood his unintentional actions. Then, together, we approached the wall and looked down. The cat, after no longer seeing Hutchison's face, had retreated beyond the ditch and crouched, ready to leap. And indeed, as soon as it saw him, it jumped with blind, insane fury, which would have been ridiculous if it hadn't been so terrifyingly real. It didn't try to climb the wall, but shot forward as if hatred and rage had given it wings to cross the vast distance that separated them. Amelia, very much like a woman, grew concerned and said to Elias P., with warning in her voice, "For heaven's sake, be careful. This animal will try to kill you if it gets any closer. I see murder in its eyes." He laughed cheerfully. "Excuse me, ma'am, but this is truly funny. Imagine a man who's fought grizzly bears and battled Indians. Can such a man be afraid of a cat?" When the cat heard his laughter, its whole behavior seemed to change. It stopped jumping and climbing the wall, and instead calmly approached the dead kitten, sat next to it, and began licking and caressing it as if it were alive. "You see," he said, "the influence of a truly strong man. Even this animal in its rage can recognize the voice of its master and bow before him, like an Indian," was Elias P. Hutchison's only comment as we continued our walk along the castle moat. From time to time, we glanced down and saw the cat following us. At first, it would return to the dead kitten, but then, as the distance grew too great, it grabbed the kitten and continued following us, carrying it along. However, after a while, it seemed to give up because we saw it again, this time without the kitten, most likely having hidden the little body somewhere. Amelia's worry grew with this persistence, and she repeated her warning more than once. Each time, the American laughed merrily until finally, seeing that she was genuinely troubled, he said, "There's no need to worry, Mom, about this cat. I'm armed." "Yes!" And he patted the holster on his hip. "Well, yes, I'm ready to shoot the little creature, so you don't have to worry. Right here, and risk the police getting involved with a citizen of the United States carrying a weapon despite the ban." As he spoke, he peered over the wall, but the cat, seeing him, hissed and crouched down in a bed of overgrown flowers, disappearing into them. He continued, "I'll be damned if this little creature doesn't know better what's good for it than most Christians." "I'm sure we've seen it for the last time." "I'm certain it will return to its flattened kitten and bury it all on its own." Amelia chose to remain silent to avoid him, out of misplaced politeness, following through on his threat and shooting the cat. We continued onward and crossed the wooden bridge leading to the entrance, where the stone, paved steep path began between the castle and the pentagonal torture tower. As we crossed the bridge, we once again saw the cat below us. As soon as it saw us, it seemed to go mad again and renewed its furious attempts to climb the steep wall. Hutchison watched it, laughing, and said, "Goodbye, my little girl. I'm sorry I offended you, but you'll get over it in time. See you soon, sweetheart." We then passed under the long, dark arch and found ourselves at the entrance to the fortress. When we finished exploring this extraordinarily beautiful ancient place, which even the well, meaning efforts of Gothic restorers from 40 years ago, had failed to ruin, though their restorations at that time stood out with their dazzling white color, it seemed as though we had completely forgotten the unpleasant incident from the morning. The old linden tree with its knotted trunk, marked by nearly 9 centuries of life, the deep well carved through the very heart of the rock by former prisoners, and the wonderful view from the city wall, where we listened for almost a quarter of an hour to the ringing of countless city clocks. Everything helped us erase from our minds the incident with the dead kitten. We were the only visitors at the torture tower that morning, or at least so the old guard assured us. And because of that, our tour was more thorough and satisfying, something that wouldn't have been possible under other circumstances. And since we were the only source of income for the day, the guard was eager to accommodate every request we made. The torture tower is a sinister place, and when thousands of visitors pour in like a stream of life and joy, it becomes overwhelmed. However, at the time I am speaking of, it showed itself to us in its most ominous and deathly form. It seemed as though the dust of centuries had settled here, and the terror of their memories became palpable in a way that would satisfy the pantheistic souls of Philo and Spinoza. The lower room was, probably as always, an embodiment of darkness. Even the bright sunlight pouring through the door seemed to absorb into the thick walls, only illuminating the rough masonry as it had been when the builders had removed their scaffolding, now covered in a thick layer of dust, splattered here and there with dark stains that, if the walls could speak, would tell us terrifying stories of suffering and pain. We eagerly continued upward on the dusty wooden staircase, and the guard left the outer door open, giving us at least a little light as we climbed, since the single rancid candle with a long wick mounted on the wall wasn't enough for our eyes. When we passed through the floor hatch in the corner of the upper room, Amelia pressed so hard against me that I could hear her heart beating. I must admit, I wasn't surprised by her fear, for this room was even more sinister than the one below. Undoubtedly, there was more light here, but it was just enough for one to realize the terrifying surroundings. Clearly, the builders of the tower had designed it so that only those who reached the top could enjoy the light and the view. While downstairs, we had noticed a whole series of small windows, as they had made in the Middle Ages. Everywhere else we found only narrow openings in the walls, typical of fortifications from those times. There were such windows here too, but they were so high that no one could glimpse the sky through the thick walls. On shelves, disorderly leaning against the walls, were the executioner's swords, handles at both ends with wide, well-sharpened blades. Nearby, there were several chopping blocks where heads had been placed, and where steel had torn through flesh to embed in the wood. Deep grooves could be seen. Everywhere in the room, scattered in complete chaos, were various torture devices, each of which made one's heart ache. Chairs with spikes that caused sudden and unbearable pain, chairs and couches with more rounded protrusions, on which the suffering seemed lighter, but still inflicted the same result. Slowly but surely, there were thumbscrews, belts, boots, gloves, collars, all designed to tighten at will steel baskets, in which a head could be slowly crushed into pulp, long-handled scimitars with blades that allowed no resistance, an invention of the Nuremberg police system, and many other diverse implements for injuring a person at the hands of another. At the sight of these dreadful things, Amelia turned pale as a sheet, but fortunately, she didn't faint, because, overcome by shock, she sat on one of the spiked chairs, causing her to jump up with a scream, healed from the impending faint. We both pretended that she was distressed mainly due to her dress, which had been soiled with dust from the chair and the rusty spikes, and Mr. Hutchison decided to accept this explanation, laughing good-naturedly. But the main object in this room of horrors was the device known as the Iron Maiden, which stood in the middle of the room. It was a roughly carved figure of a woman, somewhat resembling a nun from the Order of the Bell, or, more precisely, Noah's wife in the childlike models of Noah's Ark, but without the slender waist and rounded hips that had become an inseparable part of the aesthetic type of the Noah family. In fact, one would hardly recognize a human figure in this device, if the creator had not painted rough strokes of a woman's face on it. The machine was rusty on the outside and covered in dust. In the front, where the waist would have been, a rope was tied and passed through a pulley attached to a wooden beam supporting the ceiling. The guard pulled the rope and showed us that the front of the figure was hung on one side with hinges like a door. We also saw that the walls of the figure were very thick, with only enough space inside for a person to fit. The door was also thick and very heavy because, despite the pulley mechanism, the guard exerted great effort to open it. The weight was partly due to the fact that the door was clearly designed to fall down with its full weight, so that it could close by itself when the rope was released. The inside was eaten away by rust, but no, the rust of time couldn't have penetrated so deeply into the iron. The rust of these cruel stains had indeed absorbed into the walls, but it was only when we examined the door from inside that we fully realized its demonic purpose. There were several long spikes on it, square and massive, wide at the base and sharp at the tip, arranged so that when the door closed, the upper ones would pierce the victim's eyes, and the lower ones would pierce the heart and intestines. The sight was unbearable for poor Amelia, and this time she fainted, so I had to carry her downstairs and lay her on a bench outside until she came to. Proof of how deeply she had been affected is the large birthmark that my eldest son still carries on his chest to this day, which, according to our family agreement, represents the Nuremberg Maiden. When we returned to the room, Hutchison was still standing in front of the Iron Maiden, clearly lost in thought, and we had the great honor of hearing his musings in the form of a sort of prelude. So it seems to me, he began, that I've learned something here while the lady graciously recovered from her faint. We may be falling behind in our part of the bottle. Out there, on the prairies, we thought we were winning points with the Indians when it came to making someone feel uncomfortable. But it seems that our medieval friends, the keepers of the law, have outdone us. Splinters was pretty good with the trick he played on the Indian woman, but this young lady is far above him. Look, the tips of these spikes are still sharp, even though the edges are eaten away by what's dripped down them. It wouldn't be a bad idea for our Indian experts to have a few samples of this toy, so they can send them to the reservations just to scare the men, and the women too, and show them that, no matter how good they are, the ancient civilization behind our backs still beats them. But why don't I try stepping into this box for a minute to see what it feels like inside? No, please don't, Amelia cried. It's so terrifying. But, dear madam, nothing is too scary for a curious mind. I've been in all sorts of strange places in the past. I spent an entire night hidden in the carcass of a horse while the fire raged over the prairie in the Montana area. I've also slept in a dead buffalo when the Comanches went on a war raid, and I really didn't want to fall into their hands. I spent 2 days in the collapsed tunnel of Billy Brancho's gold mine in New Mexico, and I was one of the 4 trapped in the sunken caisson for more than half a day while we were laying the foundations for the Buffalo Bridge. I've never backed out of any unusual experience so far, so why would I back out this time? It seemed like he had decided to carry out his experiment So we urged him on. "All right, but hurry up, friend. Let's get this over with." "Agreed, General," he replied, "but I don't think we're quite ready yet. The gentlemen, I mean my predecessors, were probably not volunteers for this service." "Probably not." "It seems to me there was quite a complicated tying process before the blow was struck. I want everything to be done properly, which means I need to be tied up first. Do you think that old fellow over there will be able to dig out some rope to tie me up as it should be?" The question was directed at the old guard, who seemed to follow the flow of his speech without fully grasping the dialectical gems and imagery, and he shook his head. His protest seemed purely procedural and therefore manageable. The American handed him a gold coin and said, take it, my friend. You deserve it. And don't worry, we're not inviting you to a cocktail with bow ties." The guard took out a thin, unraveled rope and began tying up our companion, following the rules very precisely. When he finished with the upper part of his body, Hutchison declared, "Wait a second, Mr. Judge. I might be a bit too heavy for you. You can't lay me in the iron chest. Let me lie down by myself, and then you can finish my legs." As he spoke, he lay on his back in the opening, which was just the right size for him. Amelia watched in horror, but evidently she didn't want to interfere. The guard diligently finished his task, tying his legs, so he couldn't move and was essentially bound to his voluntary prison. He seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself, and the hint of a smile characteristic of his expression blossomed before he said, "This Eva is made from the rib of a dwarf. There's not enough space for a well-developed citizen of the United States to stretch. We from Idaho make our coffins more spacious. Now, Mr. Judge, begin to slowly lower the door. I want to experience the thrill that those before me felt when the spikes were getting close to their eyes." "Oh, no! No! No!" Amelia screamed hysterically. "This is awful! I can't watch! I can't!" But the American was persistent. "Tell me, Colonel," he turned to me, "why don't you take the lady for a little walk? I wouldn't want to upset her, but since I'm already in here, and I've traveled 8,000 miles, wouldn't it be a shame to give up on the experience I've been longing for? It's not every day you get to feel like a canned good. You and Mr. Judge will finish the job quickly, and when you return, we'll all have a good laugh." For the umpteenth time, curiosity-based determination outweighed the scale, and Amelia remained tightly pressed against me, trembling as the guard slowly released the rope that held the iron door. Hutchison watched the first movement of the spikes, and his face literally lit up. "Yes, yes," he said. "I haven't had this much fun since I left New York, excluding a fight with some French sailor in Wapping, and that didn't turn out quite right. I haven't arranged such a spectacle for fun on this crappy continent that has neither bars nor Indians, and where people walk around calmly." "Slower, Mr. Judge! Don't rush it!" "The spectacle has to be worth the money. Seriously. I'm telling you." The guard likely inherited a bit of his predecessor's blood in this ominous tower, as he deliberately operated the device excruciatingly slowly. After 5 minutes, the outer edge of the door had moved just a little, something that affected Amelia. I saw her lips turn pale and her hand slackened in mine. I briefly turned my eyes away to find a suitable place to lay her down, and when I turned back, I saw that she was staring somewhere off to the side of the Virgin. I traced her gaze and saw the black cat that had crouched out of sight. Its green eyes were glowing like warning lights in the darkness of the room, and their color was enhanced by the blood smeared across its fur and muzzle. I shouted, "The cat! Watch out, the cat!" At that moment, it had already jumped out in front of the device. It looked like a triumphant demon. Its eyes glowed bloodthirstily. Its fur was so bristled it seemed twice as large, and its tail flicked like a tiger facing its prey. Elias P. Hutchison saw it and chuckled, his eyes sparkling with delight as he said, "By God, if that Indian hasn't painted herself with the fiercest war paints. Please, push her away if she tries to pull any of her tricks on me, because the boss has tied me up so tightly I won't be able to keep my eyes safe if she tries to tear them out." "Hey, you there, Mr. Judge? Don't loosen the rope, you'll make my oil shine!" At that moment, Amelia finally fainted, and I had to catch her around the waist to prevent her from collapsing to the ground. While I was dealing with her, I noticed the black cat preparing to jump and rushed to chase it away. Just then, with what seemed like a shriek, it leaped, but not, as we expected, onto Hutchison, but straight onto the face of the guard. It seemed like it was digging its claws into him like the raging dragon in Chinese paintings, and indeed, when I looked, I saw that its claws had gone right into the poor man's eye, tearing it and continuing down his cheek, leaving a thick red streak through which blood poured as though from every vein. Before he even felt the pain, the man let out a scream of pure terror, jumped back, and dropped the rope that was holding the iron door. I rushed to catch him, but it was too late. The winch spun wildly, and the rope unwound at the speed of lightning. The massive lid was falling, pulled by its own weight. Before it closed, I managed to catch a glimpse of our poor companion's face. It was frozen in terror. His eyes were frozen in hellish shock, as if he were stunned, and no sound escaped his lips. Then the spikes did their job. Fortunately, the end came quickly because when I lifted the door, the spikes had embedded themselves so deeply that they were stuck in the bones of his skull, and the lid lifted along with the body, freeing it. Actually, not the body, but the corpse from the iron prison. And so, as it was all entangled, the body thudded to the ground, making a disgusting sound, and the face turned upwards as it fell. I rushed to my wife, lifted her, and carried her outside, because I feared that if she regained consciousness and saw this scene, she would lose her sanity. I laid her on a bench outside and rushed back inside. The guard was leaning against the wooden pillar, moaning in pain, pressing a blood-stained cloth to his eyes. The cat was sitting on the poor American's head, purring loudly and licking the blood that oozed from his empty eye sockets. I hope no one finds it cruel that I grabbed one of the old executioner's swords and sliced the cat in two as it sat there.